Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, what if you met yourself? You know, if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide ranging variety of entertainment industry professionals. We pick their brain about current projects, state of the industry, how they got started, and so very much more in a light and in a conversational fashion. And you know, if you like how we do things around here, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you do, because quite frankly, you're listening right now. And if you are, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Give us the old 5-star rating on your podcast provider of choice. We're available pretty much everywhere. Places like Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Google. And plus, we archive every single one of our episodes over at our In the Seats YouTube channel. So if you can give us a like and subscribe there as well, we would absolutely appreciate it. Also, don't hesitate to check us out on social media. We're on the Facebook, we're on the Twitter, we're on the Instagram, we're on the Letterboxd, we're on the TikTok, and I even think we're on the Tumblr for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I do dare say most importantly, please pay us a visit over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, for all the latest and greatest from the world of film, television, basically the moving image at large. Because guess what? If we love to watch it and write about it and talk about it, we love it even more when you come by and read about it and listen about it. So please, pay us a visit. On this very special episode, we've got a good one. We're diving into a truly fascinating piece of cinema, which just got extended over at the TIFF Bell Lightbox. It is called Subtraction, and it is from Iranian director Mani Haghighi. I hope I pronounced that right. It is really a fascinating thriller, and it's the story of a married couple who living in Tehran, and they think they see their doppelgangers, their exact opposites, and they follow them from a distance. Then they interact with them, and then there's all this drama going on with it, and they get intertwined with each other, and it's really quite fascinating because the film plays on so many different levels, just from self-doubt, societal stress, so many different things that really go on in the world today, but again aren't necessarily talked about in a place like Tehran or Iran. And I mean, it's a really fantastic piece of cinema with some great performances, and we had the unique pleasure of sitting down and talking with the director and writer Mani about the origins of the story and working on it all, and just the nature of the beast that this film is, and sort of telling a story like this, which is done in a gorgeous and really beautiful cinematic way. It really is a bit of a throwback to film noir, a little bit of Hitchcock. It is a fantastic piece of cinema, which I do recommend you see on as big of a screen as humanly possible. But first, please enjoy our talk with Mani about his film Subtraction, because between you and me, it's a darn good one. All right, well, just to kick it off, I mean, obviously, congratulations on the film. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I'm curious, though, walk me through, I guess, sort of the inspiration of the origin of why you wanted to make this story.
You know, it's always very difficult to answer this question with any film because the inspiration comes from so many different sources. But what I can tell you is that I was talking to my co-writer about a play that he was translating. He was translating Carol Churchill's play called A Number. I don't know if you're familiar with that play or with that writer.
I'm not, no.
Carol Churchill is a British playwright, and her play A Number is about it's sort of a cloning narrative. It's about a person whose son is cloned many times. So we're talking about this notion of what interested us in that play, and we initially thought of making it into a film, was the idea of taking this notion very seriously and making a sort of a doppelganger plot, not as a science fiction film, but as a social realist kind of film, as if it was real. Like taking the actual horror of it and presenting it as something that was actually really happening, not some kind of fantasy story. So that switch between the genres was what excited us initially. And the second thing was obviously, okay, so there's so many really good doppelganger films already. How is ours going to be different? And the answer immediately was, it's going to be a couple. So a pair of people looking exactly like another pair of people just seemed so crazy. And then to present it as a realist film. You know what I mean by a realist film? Like as if,
No, totally.
there's
Yeah, yeah,
there are no
yeah.
spaceships or anything like that. So yeah, that's what got us excited.
No, and I mean it works so well because I mean we're grounded in real life, but we're still like you keep us on very uncertain ground through the
Yeah.
entire thing. And I mean something I think really highlights that is just the fact that I mean this is a gorgeous film. Like you shot the hell out of it. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how you wanted this to be a very sort of visually stylistic film and how that sort of plays in to the mood of the piece, I guess is the right way to word it.
What's always interested me, and this is the case with every single element in terms of production value in the film, is to not to commit to a particular genre, but to commit to the border that distinguishes one genre from another, like one world from another. This kind of amorphous line between two worlds. Um, so realism, fantasy, science fiction, social realism, things like this. And so in terms of uh, cinematography, I thought on the one hand it has to be perfectly real. I mean, we're not gonna do a stylized cinematography, but we're
Mm,
gonna come as close to it as we can. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's all real. It's all, if it's dark, it's because we're in the basement. If it's dark, it's because we're in the stairway. If it's dark, it's because it's at night. But it's dark, you know. So it's noir, but in a very real sense. That's what was exciting about that, and the idea of making it as dark as possible without it turning into a black leader film. That was kind of the idea.
I love that idea though, just walking right up to the edge of the genre, but I mean, not quite going over it. I mean, the minute you said that, I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, again, you've got this great cast that we're working with here who really definitely had a sense of the material and where you were going with it. Because I mean, it could have easily shifted one degree or another if someone was playing it as noir, or if someone was playing it as science fiction.
Yeah.
Like, how did you manage to sort of keep your actors very much on that straight line?
Uh, Rehearsals and conversations and picking extremely intelligent actors. That's the main thing. I mean, intellectuals. These two people are both,
Mm,
they're not just actors, they're actually, I mean, maybe it sounds pompous to say this, but they're thinkers. That they read things, they know about the world. When you talk about genres, they know what you're talking about. So the way I direct actors is really just through conversation. I explain to them in minute detail what I'm going to do and why I'm doing it this way and what I'm trying to achieve. And it takes a long, long time. Um, so, yeah. And they're really
well, and
good.
I mean, it's one of those.
Good
Well,
actors.
they're fantastic. I mean, obviously, and it's one of those things where I appreciate just throughout the length of the narrative, you're never hitting us over the head with anything. You're never hitting us over the head with any kind of beats. And even from a literal standpoint, you're not. It's a dark and it's a violent story, but you're never showing it to us. Like, how conscious were you? Like, how important was it for you to really sort of keep the truly terrible stuff sort of in our imaginations and not on screen?
Well, it's a trick. I mean, not showing something always makes it a lot more terrible than showing it. Obviously, that's the first rule in the book. Um, so yeah, not showing things, both in terms of the space outside the frame, like actually some important stuff is happening outside the frame, like you're just off the
Mm.
frame, or ellipses, like there's a time shift. We don't really know how much time has passed. That kind of confuses you. Is it next day or is it the next week? Or there's a sense of creating suspense through various forms of masking and not telling and kind of, you know, eluding facts, basically. But we worked a lot on that, like we both in terms of the writing of the script and framing and lighting, always trying to give as little information as possible.
No, I mean, I had read that you were sort of in pre-production and starting production, and this right when COVID really hit and started to hit
Yeah.
hard. I'm kind of curious because of the nature of the story, where again, like you said, you needed to have time for conversations, have time to sort of understand the kind of shots you wanted to set up. Was I mean, like obviously it was difficult, but did it end up being a bit of a blessing at the same time in order to give you
No,
extra
no, no.
time to
It
kind of
was
marinate with the
not.
material?
No, it wasn't a blessing at all. We all got COVID, and I was in the hospital on the
Oh
verge of
no.
dying for 5 days. Um,
Oh
this,
God.
yeah, this project took 9 years from the time we wrote it to the time we finished shooting it.
Oh
And
wow.
during that time, I was I had already cast. I mean, the cast changed over time, but we ended up with the people we started with, basically. Um, and I was talking to them for 9 years as I was writing it, and so we would go out for dinner with the actress, my friend Taraneh, and you know, I would tell her what I'm doing, and so she was a part of this project from the very beginning. Also in Iran, we do production very differently than you do in the West. We have a very long pre-production period. Sometimes it takes
Okay.
as long as 6 months, um, because the costs are not as high as they are in the West. So I have a lot of time to sort of
Okay.
really make things work. Basically, I don't want to talk too much about this, but essentially I make the film in pre-production. Like everything
Okay.
is done. By the time pre-production is finished, it's just a matter of just going and shooting exactly what we know we're going to be doing. It's a very precise process. Very little thinking takes place on the set. It's all
It's the Hitchcock method. You shoot what you need. You don't have excess.
more or less, yeah. I mean, that's how, because I get very excited on the film set, and that prevents me from thinking clearly. So what I try to do is to make sure that I've done all the work beforehand, before the shooting even begins, before day one. And so the actual shooting, I'm not saying it's a boring process, but it's a very well rehearsed, clear process, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thematically, I really enjoyed sort of how you're playing with the idea of societal anxiety,
Mm.
just in terms of day-to-day life and how people feel. And it definitely felt from a sort of cultural standpoint that, at least in the grander schemes, while the individual may have anxiety about what's going on around them and things like that, it's not something that's discussed, at least from an Iranian sort of cultural standpoint. It's just kind of dismissed. Was that sort of a key crux for you to really make this very much a human story? Because at the end of the day, I mean, I forgot about language, I forgot about setting. I just was wrapped up into the anxiety of these characters.
Yeah, Iran, as you know, I mean, we're living in a dictatorship, and people, when they're making a film, are always asking themselves how far can they go in discussing this ordeal.
Right.
Every single film, if whether it's a comedy or whatever it is, you're always asking yourself, how am I going to reflect this? And I think people err on the side of talking about it and actually making it a subject. So you often have, and then it ends up falling into the predictable neorealist trap of, like, here's a desperate person because she's poor and it's a woman in Iran. Blah, blah, blah. So these are all fine films, but I was hoping to kind of evoke something as opposed to express it or talk about it explicitly. So I was hoping to evoke this atmosphere of paranoia and anxiety and horror. In a sense, it's a horror film more than it's a science fiction film.
For
Um,
sure.
so the idea of evoking stuff. So the rain, for example, like, um, it's always there. Hardly anyone ever talks about it because people are just used to it. But it's a sign of something big having gone wrong. This is one
Mhm.
example of how you try to kind of say something without actually explicitly saying it.
Well, I mean, the rain, the long shots in the corridors, there was definitely something about the visual language of this film, which for me, that took it to a very sort of different and interesting level. And I mean, just to start putting a bow on this, I mean, I'm always curious. This felt like a filmmaker's film to me. Like for you as a filmmaker, and obviously as a fan of films, more than likely, what are the kind of films that drew you in as a young man and made you want to start making films?
That's a really, I mean, in the context of Subtraction, that's a really good question. I think let me I mean, yeah, the actual answer is I watched everything. I just watched films between the
Right.
ages of like 7 until 20 years old. I did really nothing else. I just watched movies. I watched absolutely everything. I wasn't a film snob. I've never been a film snob in terms of, you know, for example, I don't believe in a distinction between, say, pop films and art house films and things like this. I've made pop films and I've made, you know, films like this, intellectual type films, whatever. But when it comes to this, obviously, the main inspiration was Lars von Trier, I think, which is kind of
Okay.
a strange thing to say, maybe, but it really was the way he, for example, Melancholia is
Oh
that's
yeah,
a,
no, totally.
you know, that's a science fiction film. It's a film about worlds in collision, literally, and yet it manages also to kind of put all that in the context of a very personal family story, right? About a woman who's getting married. You know how it is. So yeah, Lars von Trier and David Lynch are the two people who I was kind of thinking about as I was not exactly as influences, but people who give you courage to take the extra step toward what you want to do.
For sure.
Because
No,
they've done it.
totally.
You know, they've done it, and
Now I'm
so
curious, just to put a bow on this, because again, this is one of those movies that I think can and does translate language, translate culture, and really gets down to sort of that inner angst of the people that we see on screen. But I mean, also at the same time, you've been working since '04, you've been making movies. I'm kind of curious, how has the landscape changed from your perspective in terms of getting your films out there to more of a broader global audience?
since I started working, or since when?
Yeah, since you started working at, yeah.
Well, it's become more interesting because streaming has
Mhm.
arrived. And so the whole concept of a film as such, uh, I'm not saying it's under any kind of danger, but it needs to redefine itself in a very serious way
Mm.
to go on. Um, it's not clear that your films are going to be watched in a movie theater anymore. Like you can't take that
Yeah.
for granted the way I used to. And so with a film with Subtraction, a film that is 90% in darkness, that's kind of a dangerous thing because you can't watch this film on your phone. You know, it's just gonna
No.
it's not really gonna work. So these are the things you have to think about more often. I think the landscape has changed uh, because of streaming, because of the internet, because I think it's more challenging and therefore more fun. It used to be very easy. When I started making films, I think I made my first film in '02, '03. That's when we started making it. It was easier because it was the beginning of the digital age, and you just picked up a
Right.
movie camera and went out with your friends, and 3 days later you could, if you wanted to, have a pretty good, interesting Dogma '95 feature film. It's
Exactly.
not as
Yeah.
easy anymore, and so you need to rethink all of this in the face of streaming and Netflix and things like this. But I think it's a
But I
good
mean, you
thing.
know what though? No, it is. I mean, I agree with you because I mean, at the end of the day, it allows for opportunities for more eyes on different kinds of product. And I mean, at the end of the day, at least I think what you've made here with this film is just pure out cinema. It's immersive, it's gorgeous, it's engaging, and I mean, I had a great time with it. But I mean, honestly, Manny, congratulations on the work, and thank you so much for the time
Thank you
today.
so much. Thanks for talking to me.
Alrighty.
All right, see you.
Absolutely.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.